Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction, and really it's a great honor for me to have an opportunity to give a talk in BCS. And I've been a BCS member since I was a PhD student for many years. And it is really very sort of rare to have the opportunity. I know how important for be part of the society, and I hope I could have an opportunity to join more events in the future. So I'm going to talk about a topic of which I think most of you probably, once you hear what I'm trying to say, and you will agree with me. But on the surface, and we always say information loss is bad. And whenever we say something went wrong, and we always say, oh, the information got lost. And what we normally mean information got lost is meant we mean useful information got lost. But unfortunately, the usefulness of information is somehow very difficult to define, very difficult to precisely measure. A little bit of background. I spent most of the time in Wales as a PhD student, and then a lecturer, senior lecturer, professor, and so on. And roughly about 10 years ago, and I'm here, and really great, humbled I'm here, and recruited me, come to Oxford. So really give me a lot of opportunity to do the things which are relatively fundamental, and which I probably wouldn't have time to even think about these things back in my time in Swansea. So I did a lot of work in data visualization. This is my main research topic, including early days medical imaging and sports visualization and rugby, snook, anything sort of what people in Wales fancy about it. I did it. So a fair amount of work in this area, and I also have worked on some of the machine learning problem, including aging simulation and the facial expression detection, and the music mood recently, and very recently had an industry project looking at the classification for this 360-degree images for property market. In data visualization, everyone always say, oh, you must not distort the data. And that seems to be sort of a wisdom everyone uses, seems to be correct. So why do you intentionally want to distort the data? And it's got generalized. Nowadays, is online. If you search for the guidelines for data visualization or any data science, always say accurate. You have to accurately convey the information accurate. But as a data visualization person, in my heart, I always doubt this is correct. And in fact, you only need one counterexample to prove that is not correct. Because if data is not allowed to distort it, then we would not have our wonderful London Underground map, which is nowadays every single city's metro map copying idea on that. So that, again, really related to the question of what data we can lose, or what information can we lose, what information we may not lose. That's also related to the definition about what is ground truth and how do we see the ground truth. So if something is true, and if we say that is false, then of course it's a lie, and it's inaccurate. But if a number is 120, you say it's about 100. Is that right or wrong? Is that accurate or not? And often we have a long decimal points sequence of number, and there's no way we can represent them or understand the number at that level of position. We always make it inaccurate in order to understand it. And a lot of statistical function will take a lot of numbers and combine them into a single number. And here I say, I just invented the term and middling, and it could be mean, it could be median, it could be mode, which one is correct. And that's it depends on which perspective you're looking at. And during COVID, we have a lot of time series. We have also a lot of modeling of time series. Are they accurate? which none of the curve, model curve will be precisely same as what the real data is, but how do you determine what is accurate, what is not? When it comes to the probability distribution, and nowadays in machine learning, which is really, really critical about probability distribution, we always think about the ground truth is the population probability distribution, but you can never have that. You always have inaccurate sample probability distribution. So the question is really about how we define accuracy or inaccuracy. That refer back to about 2015 and an American economist called Amos Golden, and he's also an information theoretical scientist. And he sort of invited me to Washington, DC, and I said, come over, he said, we'll pay your hotel for whatever how long you want to stay, and I have a question for you. So that's his question. He said that stock market data is now sort of in microsecond level, and it may soon be in nanoseconds. And as an economist, he said, I do not need to work on at such a data resolution. So what would be the optimal resolution for me as an economist? He posed that question is really as a philosophical question rather than a sort of really thinking I will advise him whether he should working on days or months or years, and not really. So you try to think about from information theory point of view, what meaning of from that question point of view. We spent a lot of time just drinking coffee and chatting and talking random things. Then one day we realized, and actually information loss was quite general in all the data intelligence process. So this is a simple example. Say imagine a stock market. So we may have a many time series for different shares and so on. Imagine that we're originally 1 hour long and a 5-second resolution. And you roughly can calculate the maximum entropy at the level of 200, I think 23,000 bits per time series at that level. If you aggregate it, you essentially reduce the entropy of the data, so we can do a simple aggregation. Then being a visualization person, I said, oh, if we plot the time series into a plot, and normally you may only have a 100 pixels kind of perception resolution, then you lose further information. And by the time I observe the data, I may recognize the share price is going up or going down, and they may have a little bit feature indicating it's quite volatile or maybe quite sort of flat and so on. Consider all those possible features which I kind of conceptually had in my brain. And the total amount of entropy is further reduced because the amount of variation gets less. By the time a stockbroker needs to make a decision, he or she has only 3 choices: buy, sell, or do nothing. And most time he does nothing. So anyone knows information theory would know that the maximum entropy roughly is about 1.5 bits. And in fact, because most time the stockbroker does nothing, that actually the entropy is much lower probabilistically in the way. So the general trend from a piece of data to a decision has a gigantic amount of information loss. So we say it can't be bad. If that seems to be general trend in every single kind of decision process, there must be something good about it. So let's look at a little bit more simple example, see how the information may lost through different type of processes. So we abstractly thinking only 4 types of process: statistics, algorithm, and visualization, and interaction. So since we're in the university, we're using university students' marks as an example. So imagine we have a class of students with n students with n marks. And a statistician or a statistics professor say, oh, we should just calculate the averages so we can know the class is good or bad. And maybe a computer science just to say, oh, which is using some algorithm to clustering or do something, but maybe just simply to calculate the mean and the max. Although mean and the max sounds like a statistical indicator, as a computer scientist, we all know you actually need an algorithm to search through the data to find it. So it's an algorithm solution. A visualization professor may say, oh, let's plot it as a bar chart so we can see how the students' mark look like. And alternatively, as a database professor say, no, just give me the number. I type in the number individually so I get to the marks for you. There's four professors have four different approaches. Each one fundamentally will incur information loss. Statistician means the n numbers change to one number. The algorithm in this case, where n number will become two numbers. The visualization, the plot, as we know, the plot resolution is very questionable. You probably can't see. So 78 and 77, you can't distinguish 77, 78 easily. And database, unless you spend all the time typing every single student number in, get the data. Actually, if you type half of the data, a student name in, then you actually lose another half of one data, which in this case. And clearly, there's a huge amount of information loss. In the industry, and you will say, oh, we should get 4 professors working together. But in academics, we don't, I guess. And okay, they carry on argue, and each argue their ways is more accurate. The statistician has the formula to say, look, we do the formula, it must be accurate. Computer scientists have the algorithm, and database to say, look at the numbers exactly the same as it used to be. The only person who don't have a good argument there is visualization person, because you can't say the visualization is accurate. It's somehow not accurate. However, the visualization can perform all other 3 functions to a certain extent. You can look at the bar chart, you can guess the mean value. You can look at the bar chart to probably most times is correct to find out the mean and the max. And you can also guess each individual student to see what the marks they may be, except that none of them are as good as that. So the visualization is a multitask. While the mean value cannot indicate the mean and the max cannot indicate the mean value, same thing, and so on. So now you start to see that each algorithmic or the statistic method, they are very specifically defined for one task to do well, while visualization is to do multiple tasks. If we define a much better, or from more selfish point of view, a better metric to measure the accuracy, we say, imagine you only see the output and you try to reverse guess what was the input. So in other words, you have to, from looking at the mean value, to imagine what the n marks may be. Or you look at the mean and the max to imagine what the n marks will be. Alternatively, you look at the bar chart to try to guess what the n mark might be. And or you look at several students, the marks, and try to guess. Then that measurement is applicable to every single professors equally. Then you can start to see the impact of this reverse mapping from one-to-many mapping. Now, from one-to-many mapping reverse, and you see none of them is accurate. But which is better? And that is really depend on many other things. So it depends on the tasks, of course. You may say, I really just want to compare the 2 courses, so I've taken the mean value is good enough. You may say, I want to retrieve data to look at each individual student's circumstance, and so on. And you may have the knowledge, which is really important, about the marks. You may say, oh, I marked the similar, I taught a similar course last year, so I roughly know the mark. Or you are generally in education, you say, oh, the marks probably is a normal distribution around the sort of 65% level. So let's think about how we measured. Think about how Shannon would measure it. And Sheldon considered everything is a communication system in his definition. And imagine a communication system is going to send a letter to you. And you don't know which letter it is. But you know the alphabet. So I'm using the, say, genetic example, say, 4 possible letters, G, A, C, T. Then as a computer scientist, we not all know is GACT, you can model it with 2 bits. And it's enough to model 4 options. And this is the uncertainty before you receive the data. By the time you receive the data, you may receive G. Your uncertainty disappeared. And Sheldon calls it information. And this can be measured by the so-called Sheldon entropy. In fact, Sheldon wanted to call it information, but because the words information was so complex and with many semantic interpretation. So some of you may know that von Neumann actually was in a meeting with Sheldon to say, let's just call it entropy, since no one understands what it is. That was partially recorded in this very nice book by James Clerk. So if we think of the alphabets in a much more general way, instead of just 4 letters, say, of course, English alphabet is alphabets. We can also think about all the English prefixes as an alphabet. So each prefix essentially is a letter. And you can think about all words will form an alphabet, or even all sentences, and all the cities in a region, and all the time series in about temperature. So you can start to see the patterns involving. Sheldon was specialized for calculating the probability of the frequency of 1 letter, 2 letters in conjoined, and so on, as a part of the compression and the encryption kind of operation, and he was involving at that time. So looking back, so we can actually also looking into the way think about it from information theoretical point of view. There's 2 types of inaccuracy, or 2 types of problem. And on one end, there's an information loss in that way. It's forward. And the second is reversing. In some way, you get to the error message here. And in the moment that both were considered to be bad because you're losing information in that way and somehow reverse, you're causing errors, which is the consequences of many two-way mapping. But if you think carefully, since all 4 professors all want to lose information, so they can't be bad, the forward part maybe should be considered as a good point. So from data visualization, we always do the kind of a process, and we always losing information, and used to think it's bad. But if you split it to be partly is good, partly bad, and the whole process also cost. You look at the pictures, you have to think, and so on, and there will be costs involved in that. And that becomes the formula which Amos and I are thinking can be used for modeling all different types of processes in computing or data analysis. And as an economist, Amos calls it cost-benefit ratio format. And you can measure the top part. Luckily, they can be measured using information in bits. And the bottom part ideally should be using energy to sort of have a unified cost measurement. But in practice, most likely you will approximate using time or money and other involving. We even have a mathematical formula. Later I'm going to talk tiny little bit about the formula itself. And I skip that. So now once you take in the cost into account, and then you start to realize quite often we intentionally looking for information which is not quite accurate in order to reduce the cost. And imagine you're a stockbroker again, and imagine you looking at this animation, and it shows you the stock market price changes. And by the time the animation finished, if I ask you, say, can you buy, would you like to buy or sell? You can't make decision because you can't remember a thing. Because the cost to us to watching animation is extremely expensive. Our working memory just not capable of store all those information received. Now you actually appreciate the spreadsheet, and you say, oh, I could look at the spreadsheet. But actually, the reason stockbroker using the line chart is because it's quick. You just take 1 second and you scan it. You have to see somehow the whole picture, and you will need many minutes to look at the spreadsheet. So the cost element come in. So people intentionally choose something which is not accurate because it's costless to observe. And I know as a colleague in Utah called Chris Johnson, Professor Chris Johnson has been constantly looking for a good story about data visualization. He's a visualization scientist. I said to Chris, I said, you don't need looking for anything. You only think about the value of the time series visualization. Imagine you ask every stockbroker in the world, unless they pay £1 a day, they cannot look at the time series. How many people would be willing to pay £1 a day? Every stockbroker would. And that's the value that the visualization will worth. And now we can explain the London Underground map, why the abstraction, why everything kind of changes being kind of abstracted to a very common thing. We also can explain the things I'm really research a lot about the volume rendering, how when we extract the information from the volumetric metadata to a single image, we actually throw away a lot of information because the array of voxels through that will somehow combined into a single pixel. You have to lose huge amount of information. Because we have a knowledge about how human skull heads should look like, it makes sense. In fact, a lot of the industrial data, if you're using this way, it doesn't work because humans don't have enough knowledge about how they should look like. And so those rendering may not work very well. And I can also show you another example, and this is another piece of Oxford with the mathematics. So there's a mathematical colleague who were working on the biological data and need to deal with those kind of cells, and unfortunately, biologists have to somehow spend a huge amount of time to watch the video and then rewind the video, because every time you can only watch one cell, and you notice you cannot watch all the cells. So for whatever number of cells there, they have to rewind the video all the time. Our mathematics colleague will try to find a mathematical formula that can express everything, but actually really quite difficult. So what we do is we summarize the video into a static image. And then suddenly you see the path of each cell much easily. You even find a cell doing those rotational move, which is very unusual and very difficult to spot in the video either. So now you can see that quite easily. Actually, the visualization coded a fair amount of information, roughly about 20 pieces of information is coded. And the one interesting piece is the particular focus about the speed of the cell moves within 1 second. So inside the curve shows the straight line movement, the distance moved. Outside shows the actual zigzag movement by the cell, the actual distance moved. And if the two rings are close together, means the cell's movement is very efficient, it's almost straight line. If the ring's bigger, that means they move a lot. Now you can summarize this information to see a variety of those are the human cells, from average to good and not so good and very bad. And two different animals, you can see the pattern. Now you can see the different behavior of different animals' cells quite easily. You can notice the hamster and the sperm whale are very fast, very efficient. The rings are close together. And you can see different animal in different way. And then you can also see the rat, which is the normal rat, which is don't move very fast in their cell. But if you put on the rat on drugs, so they start moving really fast, but very inefficient. The gap was gigantic. So this sort of works very well for visualization and maybe for some other things. Actually works for perception as well. My colleague once said, if something can explain how visualization works, must be able to explain how cognition and perception works. So in many ways, our vision system is very similar to a data processing system. And we have gigantic amount of information coming through our eyes. And we can do parallel processing in a lot of cases. And sometimes we have to do sequential. And for example, we look at the image. If I say, can you spot any part of the image is red? And you can do it very quickly. But if I ask you to find a letter Y in the size, you have to sequentially search for it. So our vision system is designed to process certain information quicker and certain information slower. And the selective attention and the Gestalt effect, I'm going to talk about that. Psychologists, any colleagues ever worked with psychology, they always want to show you the sort of behavior human seems to have a problem. For example, anyone watching those videos where indicating to say, oh, the people can't even spot there's someone wear a gorilla suit and passing by and nobody seems to notice it and so on. And but of course, the psychology was intentionally directing you to counting the basketball passing and so on. And in practice, we always have a selective attention. So I would ask students at that point to say, did you actually notice what's the pattern of the carpet in this room? And most people didn't notice. And so that is, you don't pay attention to it. You select attention. If you need to pay attention to everything, you will need a supercomputer on your back. So you will never be able to survive. So in other words, we have a very smart attention system. We pay attention to things really important. We start to ignore vaguely, notice other things. Of course, if we carefully encounter certain situations, we have so-called blindness problem. We didn't see certain things, which we think, or we should have seen that. Similarly, Gestalt effect was our grouping strategy. We see things in group. We don't see a table as an individual atoms, but we see them as an entity. So our ability to see things in group sometimes cause illusion, because most people, no matter how you do, most people will not be able to see the A and the B are exactly the same color, but in fact, they are same color. So this kind of the illusion, unfortunately, is because we have a very powerful the grouping system in our vision system. We kind of build a structure based on the things, and then we eventually causing some illusion in that. Illusion was carefully designed to make sure our system have a conflict vision in the grouping strategy. And similarly, the heuristic and the bias is like our human version of machine learning. We, based on our experience, and we come out various things. And interestingly, in the UK and the US, the psychologists really like to talk about biases. And in Germany, they really like to talk about heuristic. So it's a two sides of the same coin. And in Germany, they are much more interested in the positive side. And in the UK and the US, we tend to be more interested in the negative side. And in most of the cases, actually, our heuristic is extremely well. If I throw something that I can catch it quite easily to most of people, that's a heuristic anyway. It's only when the heuristic are things we not practice on a daily basis, and we start having biases, or like election, because we don't vote every day, and we don't vote. So that, and the amount of information we need, so our models are not very well trained, not enough sample to train our ability to vote. So that that in many ways that indicating sort of sometimes the bias is coming in. And similarly, memory, we have a very poor memory. So we remember the things in items in abstraction, and then we try to reconstruct that. So now you can see that the same idea about the losing information is also a fundamental as a part of the human capability in perception and cognition. And then we can connect it to other information theoretical applications as well in a broader view. And information theory always talk about communication to start with encoding and decoding with a signal in the channel, there's a noisy channel in the middle. And people also use information theory to consider the encryption, the decryption, and the compression and the decompression, and so on. And in all those cases, those are to somehow in many ways sort of designed in pairs, and they both sort of work in well. But when it comes to the data intelligence or data analysis, we have the original words, we come in with the capture the data. We can treat the data as encrypted as well as compressed data, because data is kind of some hidden information inside data, maybe just show things in the surface, but then show things in behind. Compressed meant we actually throw away some data because the data can't be captured easily, or there's noisy and there's distortions and so on. And now throughout the process, we get decision. So it looks like it's not synchronized with others. And then we can see that those are original data and those are reconstructed data, and we really have some problems to synchronize it. But once we introduce the concept of reconstruction as a part of that, and whoever needs to make decision has to look at the data, imagine how the world really look like in order to make that decision. Whoever make decision always ask the question, why do you make the decision like that? Does that match with the reality? So we do unconsciously reconstruct, except we never do it in a precise way. And so the use of reconstruction as a measurement is actually the most objective measurement to a certain extent. And once you use that thinking about encoding and decoding, you also notice actually it's everywhere, that way of thinking. And for example, in languages, and you can have more compressive way of writing. For example, people text you. Of course, it could mean a specific person or could mean a letter U, and it takes a while for people like old people like me and to get used to it. Or you can have a specialized symbol to mean something. And I'm not sure anyone is sending a text at the moment to say, oh, means talk is a bit like that. And hopefully not. And those are kind of words only my daughter would use, and to really sort of and in their message and so on, and so it could mean a type of relation, but of course people like me were, so that they not only compressed, they also kind of encrypted to a certain extent. And so anything about language, like we can even send in a false information, totally distorted information in language, humor, and kind of cynical way of saying things. And they are all distorted information. Only the people who has the knowledge can reconstruct it. And now you start to see the how powerful that way of thinking is already kind of deeply embedded in our everyday life. So since we know that, actually what now and how sort of potentially we can use that theory, and the idea of the theory need to be able to explain the reality, and I think we have done that quite well with that theory. Ideally, we should be able to measure of a measurement, and ideally we should be able to make a prediction, and that too are still ongoing. And the measurement originally proposed by Amos and I wasn't too perfect. And unfortunately, this one part of that is bounded. This is unbounded. So although both are really, really commonly used, and we were aware of that problem, but Amos said that is based on information theory, there was no obvious solution to it. And so that was the issue. Then later on, I'm working with another Spanish colleague, and we started to modify this part to try to make it bounded, so that both sides up, because the amount of information you can reduce, it should be somehow close to the amount of distortion, the maximum amount of distortion you should have. And because the measurement itself, most of the measurements are not ground truths, whether it's a meter or with an inch, they're not ground truths, they're human defined, they're ground truths to a certain extent. So the idea was to try to find a relatively comfortable measurement we can actually explain the reality much more easy when we produce a number, and we can use consistently with that. And to do that, we actually have to invent a new divergence measure to do that. But I'm not going to bore you with detail, and there's a lot. There's actually the two parts paper try to explain why this particular measure may be better. And back to the four professors problem. Actually, this is the way of thinking. This is a statistics algorithm and visualization and interaction or database. This is actually related to a paper that Anne remembered. We wrote together in 2011. We wrote about the pros and cons about statistics and algorithm visualization and so on. Roughly, we said the statistics sometimes for the big data set, the statistics kind of compress the information too quickly. And so we need the visualization to recover some information. So that's why you don't aggregate the time series until a single number, because to a certain level, you say, I need to see how the time series look like. And the algorithm cannot encode all the human knowledge. And so that's why algorithm need the interaction to help. So I said, every time your computer shows you a pop-up window to say yes or no, computer essentially say, I don't know, can you help me? And every time we answer a yes no question, we give one bit information to computer. Every time we take a multiple choices, we give many bits to computer as well. So we actually are giving the computer the knowledge which computer doesn't have. And the visualization, unfortunately, if you have a lot of data, doesn't know what to visualize. And so you need the algorithm and the statistical or the human to help the visualization to choose what type of things to visualize. And the interaction may be great, but it really costly. Every time you press a button, it takes 15 seconds. And as here, I'm not going to mention the TMS. Anyone in the university will know that it's a poorly designed user interface. Really, really costs so much effort unnecessary for people to use interactive with the system. So take that idea further, and David Ebert from Purdue University and then I would propose a way, try to relook at the way how to optimize a workflow by identify the symptom and the cause and the proposal. So I'll try to identify the remedy. The mathematical underpinning concept behind that is actually quite simple, is to say, if you think that the symptom is or cause was due to this information compressed too fast, maybe by algorithm, then you can just looking for the medicine in interaction or in visualization, in possibly statistics, to see whether we can reduce the amount of compression and give a little bit data back. And if your cost is too high, usually means the data is not compressed enough. And you need to find a way to looking for which way can you compress the data. So mathematically, there's only limited choice. And of course, how do you translate it into the reality? And you need to find actually the precise medicine that will take a little bit knowledge for human to identify that. And in fact, this way of thinking was used quite a lot during COVID, and there's roughly about 20-ish people initially volunteered to help the modeling scientists in the UK to actually help them to visualize their data. And because of the idea was that modeling scientists need to see the data as frequently as possible, because their model may not quite working with the current situation of data. If they do not have the opportunity to see the data, then of course they can't improve their model easily. And in fact, the modeling scientists at that time, their ability to access data is really limited. Initially, they've only been giving us spreadsheet with a daily spreadsheet with the data, doesn't even include plots. Later, the spreadsheet itself will include some plots, but still require you to open the spreadsheet and see data. So we will design a variety of systems, and the STFC actually provided a wonderful infrastructure and for supporting this volunteer operation. Later, we received roughly about 1 year funding for managed to employ some programmers to do the work as well. And during the process, many people argue to say, oh, the visualization should not really display big numbers like that because they're wasting space and so on. Then we actually conducted the information theoretical analysis to actually conclude that actually the better option than anything else, because otherwise will cost too many minutes or hours if people have to put their mouse over there in order to see a number, and it's just not effective. And Eric, which is another Oxford research, and was encountered the problem of sensitivity analysis. People used to do the mathematically that way, but actually to the epidemiological modeling people to say, oh, that's obvious that we know this is sensitive, but we try to work out with other variables which are considered not sensitive. Do they have any use in the modeling? So we know that certain things is useful, but other things may not. Why do we should we delete it or not? So the information compressed too quickly. So what we try to is to give it a look at the information underneath, to look at each variables to see whether they behave linear or non-linear, whether certain parts of them are sensitive or certain parts are not sensitive. So that gives a little more detail on that. Meanwhile, you can also analyze the data from the plot point of view to analyze sensitivity, but that's too much data. So we needed to have a simple compression by clustering. Clustering is the algorithm coming in, you cluster them. So you're only, instead of looking 200 time series, you're roughly looking at 4 type group of time series. Then you try to see what parameters affect the prediction in each case and how the behavior of the parameters and so on. And this is another piece of work we've done with National Statistical in Netherlands. And this was actually online piece of software. They have a problem. They have extremely good the system to taking the transport data on a daily basis. So from one city to another city. So that shows the flow of the transport. And so the idea is to finding a design option based on information theory. We want to lose information in a certain way, but we still be able to see it. And we come out to find all different possible, not all, many different possible losing information. So when we're to lose information, actually, instead of draw a line in one line, you actually draw half of the line. And you rely on human to reconstruct the other half. Then you can see the two-way traffic in that way. So those are kind of systematically looking for a way to losing information. And once you start to think that way, and then you find it's much easier to deal with that. So ideally, what we want to achieve, because there are so many different types of data intelligence workflows around the world. And unlike a manufacturing workflow or business workflow, nowadays we have a consultant who will go around to tell people how to optimize them. And that's what we want to achieve. We have roughly about, we think it's reasonably good mathematical underpinning, but we haven't got any software tools for help optimization. And we don't have trained consultants to either. So that's, hopefully we need something like a business business model like a Six Sigma and those kind of model, and with a company software and a consultant to do that. I'm going to draw the conclusion, so I'm going to instead of draw a conclusion, summarize everything. I want to pose a question for everyone here in terms of machine learning. And consider a space of all possible function. And if consider function is just like I wave my ability to wave my arm is a function. And then you got a quantum computing, biocomputing, and so on. Among those functions, there's a space which we all know is the Turing space. Anything can be implemented on a Turing machine, and which is a great definition by Turing. And consider that space, and we don't know this in it or not, but we know Turing can simulate it, but doesn't guarantee that. Most likely they are not, because quantum computing will require a special type of space to define. It's a quantum Turing space. So if we write a program, we can all write program here. We're actually giving a problem, we search for some solution based on our human intelligence, looking for the space in that way. Then the machine learning framework somehow have a constrained space. For example, neural network is known to be not Turing. So there must be program you can write, but the neural network can never implement. And the decision tree is not Turing either. So again, it has a limit. You only need to think that way because you think that if we all sort of probably know the assembly language, if you think the neural network is just like a very simple assembly language with only two types of commands, and you put a nodes and make a connection, and that's your assembly language, and so you know it has a limited capability and in any way. By the time we define a neural network model, we're actually looking for an optimal solution within a tiny space in that space. And that's why if we didn't put that little big circle around in the right place, we may not find a good solution in the space. And that's why most of machine learning tend to reach certain level of accuracy and things can't go any further easily. And that's because the constraints of the space. So in other words, from the information point of view, we compress it maybe too quickly. And we didn't have the human flexibility to moving away from other space. And in fact, lately, some of the human thinking, some of the neural network constructed is almost like the program. So they are this when we're working with the property industry, there's one neural network we discovered from the literature online from archive. Actually, was a very strange piece of neural network. Actually works extremely well. And we always wonder how the programmer, quotation mark, actually discovered that neural network. So from the UK point of view, we shouldn't let AI to destroy the programming skill. We actually need the programming skills. We need the people to be able to do that. That is my question and also my conclusion. Hopefully we can find a way to help that happen, not so further kind of reduce our programming capability and that. That's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Min Chen. Are you willing to take questions from the audience?
Of course, yeah. Thank you.
So I'll take questions from here. For people online who want to pose a question, then please use the Q&A function in Zoom to do that, and we'll pick them up here. First of all, does anyone in the room have a question? In which case, I will go to the question that we've got from online, which is from Ashfad Garma. He says, in the Economist example, where would automated bot analysis come in, as humans may rely on a bot to do something based on a pre-programmed policy using more information than the human would use?
Absolutely right. So it is part of the workflow optimization, so that you can bring the bots to all monetary bots, any algorithm, and in a way, including the simple statistical aggregation, trend analysis, correlation analysis, anything you can do. And but nevertheless, and if you let me put it that way, and in some operations which I'm aware in the finance sector, they intentionally to make sure only low-level operation can be done by machine learning models like neural network. All the high-level models must be done by machine learning models human can understand, such as decision tree. So human can go there to interfere. So there's a trade-off between the algorithm and a human.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Andrew.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was kind of interested. I don't know if you heard a recent events with the post office where what you imagine is that analysts, system analysts, have to sit down with a whole group of people and define what they need. And you talked about reality, what is real. This is actually real information, modeling the actual world. Does visualization come into that sort of system? Because we obviously had a lot of inaccuracies in that post office system. I really felt for the postmasters. And you always feel for the end users when the use case is not there or it's not followed and there's inaccuracies. Does visualization help with that kind of situation to define the actual reality? Because what is actually real is different to what is programmed, and it can't be exactly the same, but it's bringing those together. That must be quite tough for any developers or analysts.
I think that if you visualization is one of the technique is it has a lower resolution than the actual data, but nevertheless, if you consider the type of advantage visualization can do, is visualization usually show more variables, but with a poorer resolution per variable. While the algorithms, they may reduce, to throw away a lot of variables. For example, if you aggregate the n numbers, say n students mark into average, you actually throw n pieces of information away, replaced by one piece of information, so one variable. So thinking from that way, particularly when the variables are aggregated too much into the variables people are not familiar with. So anyone familiar principal components analysis, most people complain is that the variable produced by principal components is people don't understand it. And so you can't reconstruct what it means easily, it can't be related to the real world. So visualization allows you to see a lot of variable and potentially a lot of see them quickly, because the reason stock brokers, and the main reason stockbroker really use visualization is what we call the main function is external memorization. They don't need to remember numbers anymore. They turn their head around to the plots is there. And think about that is the future. So modeling scientists ideally need to see a lot. And sometimes they didn't have the means to see a lot. And gradually they develop a habit to think they don't need to see a lot. And they even justify they don't need to see a lot. Quite often, even when I'm working with COVID modeling scientists, the first thing they say, oh, we don't need to see that because the model is supposed to provide abstraction of data. But to provide a better abstraction of data, you need to see the data. And that's sort of the argument we have at the beginning. And eventually they're convinced that they get.
Andrew.
So beautiful plots from Systematically would be amazing proud. The one that struck me most was really interesting was the Netherlands transport plot. That shift in ways of presenting information. What sort of people do you need to be good visualization experts? Do you need artists as well as mathematicians and scientists and coders?
I think we need both, and in fact we need all three type of skills we have, and but nevertheless, you never really have very rare you have a one person, and I think among the Oxford sort of PhD and the postdocs, we probably only have one or two have that kind of talent, and that was all front, and the programming skill and some sort of artistic appreciation, which is really important, and some of the mathematical understanding, which will also be good. But at the end, the most important is a team play. No one is perfect. So thank you.
We don't have any more questions online at the moment. Anyone else from in the room?
Just got one more.
Come on then,
It's quite
Jess.
interesting. So you remember the A-level results during COVID that affected my daughter, and eventually things turned out absolutely fine. She got to where she needs to go. But did you have a look at that? How they did the algorithm? They obviously use past results, which doesn't manifest. It doesn't represent the actual reality. It doesn't represent that cohort of students.
Yeah.
So I found your diagrams really useful.
I think
Plug in something, it comes out with something else.
I didn't look at things in very, very deeply. My instinct when I heard obviously in the college of people we talk about it, my instinct immediately at that time is to say, just provide more data to the university admission tutors, because they are smart people.
Yes.
Don't try to use algorithm to replace them, and just provide more information.
Yeah.
But I mean, algorithm can always there to make recommendations, but don't make decision for. Yeah. So when we're working with the various of applications, the first thing we try to work out is what are the people's knowledge, the experts' knowledge in whichever with the biology or the earthquake scientists and so on. And you do find that they actually knew huge amount of things. And that so the question is how you use the data science techniques to help them to overcome their things which they're not so good. And one first problem out of sort of 10, and the problem identified, the 8th problem is related to memory. We all have a very limited working memory, and psychologists knew that. It's called magic 7, roughly remember 7 items.
Thank you. I've got another question from online, and I'll take one from the group. So it's from Ashford Garma again. How would you analyze the process of recreating data when it comes to investigations, where you've only got a small amount of disparate information? So this example is in crime investigations. Is there a type of information theory that you can use to make deductions in that sort of context?
Yeah, I think I reasonably sure that the forensic scientists and the police and all this work they do use and the past experience, the past cases, which from information theory point of view is to use the known distribution, the probability distribution to reconstruct the likelihood and to analyze the number of cases. So they knew how to do it. They may not know the mathematics behind it, but yes, that from data point of view, that would be exactly the same way.
Okay, thank you.
So Min, this question isn't a technical question, but it goes to the image that you had when you talked about ramp-based, which is really interesting. And the question isn't really mine. It's from a colleague who saw you speak and use that same slide at a conference in London. And the slide shows the group of visualization colleagues who volunteered and helped on that. And she's from the US, was struck that there were very few women on the image. And yet we think of, and it may be our own bias, that visualization must attract female computer scientists and other female engineers. Is that just because that just happened to be the group that came together, or do we not have a gender balance in visualization?
I think we have almost all the female academics we can approach volunteered. So people left out didn't volunteer are males actually, and so we have all the so on the whole the proportion of female scientists were lower, probably more or less reflect the computer science in general in the UK, and yeah, I mean that's the we hope hopefully next week
Yes.
events may change it. We may set in the right course, and that problem been talked about for decades. And people always using the Sweden model to say, can UK achieve the Sweden's sort of ratio, Swedish ratio?
Yeah, I guess I think of visualization as one of those parts of computer science or information science where you would see more. It's like astrophysics in physics. Physics in general doesn't have very many women, but astrophysics is dominated by female scientists. So it's just a it is surprising to see so few.
My hypothesis actually is probably the issues more at the school level.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, because I used to teach little children code club, which is quite a big thing, and it's international. And yeah, I just had to observe what was going on around me, and I won't go into the detail, but you know, there was predominantly boys coming in, and you know, it kind of starts at that root level and trying to
but maybe
change that.
maybe we should be talking about visualization from the artist's point of view.
Yeah.
Maybe that will bring.
We can ideally, hopefully, and
Yeah.
attract more. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of that shift. I had to kind of analyze myself how I got into that. And it was at school level where my teacher said to me, hey, James, you're really good at programming here. And I was kind of discounting it so many times. Eventually I did an economics degree. I eventually ended up in computer science. But it's kind of, it's such a shift to try and get, even when I talk to girls, you know, try and get them to think, you know, this is an area you can do. It doesn't have to be, it can be looking like exactly what you want it to look like.
Yeah.
But it's a hard one.
yeah, I mean, there are many things. Certainly, the female student usually throughout quite visualization can be a topic. In fact, I was in engineering department. I'm running a big 3YP popular 3YP projects on multi-drone system design. The female students usually there's a one component is to look at, because we need multiple drones, so you have to think about the entire system, how the people operating different drones can coordinate. Usually it's always the female students taking that role to manage it, design the whole system, how the things should be coordinated. And while the male students always say, oh, machinery, so go straight. So you can see the difference.
Well, I had a sort of question and observation, which is around, it goes back to the original question, is information loss good or bad? And I guess the answer is it depends on the context and how you define the context. So I started my career in mathematical modelling, and there were essentially two types of model. There's one based on the fundamental equations of the laws of physics, and there's one which is based on a conceptual model or a statistical model. And you would normally say that you wouldn't extrapolate the results from a statistical model outside the original calibration set, but you might extrapolate a physically based model outside any data, any known data, as long as you were sure that the assumptions were still valid. And I guess the same, I think we seem to have lost sight a little bit of that, to my mind, in recent times, of saying, what are the assumptions and the circumstances within which a model is valid? And neural networks and so on, a classic example of that, that you'd actually don't necessarily know what the range of validity of that is. And the same would be true in terms of the information loss. So you briefly showed up the tube map as an example of visualization. And that's great visualization if you're traveling on the tube below ground. But in some places, it's a terrible visualization if you're traveling from one place to another above ground, because it doesn't show you how close the tube stations are. And it can direct you to take 2 trains between stations that are within sight of each other. So how do you go about documenting the context and the assumptions for the validity of some of these models?
So the key question is about measurements. So how do you measure knowledge? So we, as a part of that problem, we actually intentionally to actually study how people would estimate the distance, how long take a walk from one station to another station, based on the same length of showing on the map. And we find actually people, almost everyone has that knowledge, even the person never been in London. And we actually have some of the people in Oxford taking part in the study, they claim they've never been in London. And they seem to have that knowledge in the sense that central London, the distance is short, and further away, the distance longer. And the interesting thing that we also discovered that knowledge actually play a quite strange role. And those participants from Far East and tend to overestimate the distance between the 2 stations when in London. And quite often they just say, oh, it's not walkable, it will take 2 hours or more. But the actual distance is roughly about 15 minutes, 20 minutes further away. And so we start to see their knowledge back at their home, because the underground system in Shanghai or Turkey or those cities is much, much bigger. And to them, things go further out, is something not walkable. To London actually isn't walkable. Yeah, it's interesting. So if we could measure statistically those sort of knowledge and collecting all this information and about this measurement. And we do, in fact, we do a lot of measurement in material science. In Bronze University has a gigantic database about all the material, how they different measurements, and so we do a lot of measurements, but we can actually collect this, how people may misinterpret the information.
We don't have any more questions online. Any more for the room? Not. I think then it's time for us to thank you once again for a most interesting talk.
Thank you for inviting me.
I think we will applaud you for ourselves and on behalf of our online audience as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.